It was one of those nights when the city seemed to be breathing, a slow, heavy breath that carried with it the smell of rain, exhaust, and something unspoken, as though the buildings themselves were tired of standing. The rain didn't come in sheets. It came in a steady drizzle that painted the sidewalks in silver and made the neon signs bleed their colors into the puddles. On the corner of Franklin and 8th, under a bus stop light that flickered like it was debating whether to stay alive, stood Alyssa Turner. She was 7 months pregnant, her thin jacket doing little to keep out the chill, her hair damp from the drizzle, her sneakers worn through at the edges, and her battered suitcase leaning against her leg like a tired companion. The way her arms wrapped protectively around her belly wasn't just maternal instinct. It was the stance of a woman trying to shield her unborn child from a world that had already shown its teeth. Her eyes were rimmed with red, not from the weather, but from the slow, exhausting erosion of hope. If you had asked her even a week ago where she thought she'd be tonight, she would have said, home, making dinner. But that morning had rewritten everything. It started with a knock, 3 hard raps on the door that echoed through her tiny one-bedroom apartment. She opened it to find her landlord standing there with a folded letter in one hand and 2 uniformed security guards behind him. "Final notice," he said, voice flat. She tried to explain. She had paid rent every single month. She wasn't late. She wasn't too behind. But he cut her off with a single sentence that hit harder than a slap. "The building has been sold. New owners renovating. You need to be out by midnight." She begged, pleaded, even pointed to her belly as though that might mean something. But his expression never softened. "It's out of my hands," he said, stepping aside so the guards could start moving her things into the hallway. By noon, her entire life was sitting on the curb in the drizzle, cardboard boxes slowly darkening as the rain crept in. She stuffed what she could into her old suitcase, zipped it until the teeth strained, and left the rest. The plates she'd bought with her first paycheck, the blanket her mother had crocheted, the crib she'd been given by a kind neighbor. She didn't even have time to cry before heading to her shift at the diner, because missing a day meant missing money, and missing money wasn't an option even now. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease, and the hum of conversation was punctuated by the clink of silverware. Alyssa tied her apron and smiled for customers who didn't notice the way her hands trembled. One man at the counter, without knowing a thing about her, told her maybe if she worked harder, she wouldn't be in her situation. She swallowed the retort that rose in her throat because snapping meant no tip, and no tip meant less food tomorrow. Her feet ached, her back ached, but she stayed until closing, wiping down the last booth long after the final customer left. When she clocked out, the city had grown colder. She had nowhere to go, so she just walked. She wandered down 8th Avenue, dragging the suitcase behind her, the wheels rattling over cracks in the pavement. She ducked into a 24-hour laundromat just to warm her hands, but the owner told her to leave if she wasn't washing clothes. She tried calling an old friend, but the number was disconnected. Around 9 o'clock, a group of men outside a liquor store called out to her, their voices too friendly to be safe. She kept walking, her heartbeat pounding in her ears, one hand resting on her belly. That's when she saw the bus stop. It wasn't much, just a rusted bench and a flickering light. But it was something. She sat, the metal cold through her jeans, and whispered to herself, "I have nowhere to go." Across the street, in a black Bentley that purred softly, even at idle, Christopher Hale saw her. The city knew him as the coldest millionaire, a man who could buy a building before lunch, evict its tenants by dinner, and sell it for a profit before the week was out. He didn't stop for strangers. He didn't slow down for anyone. But when he saw Alyssa sitting there, drenched, hugging herself, clutching her belly, something in him froze. Maybe it was the way the streetlight cast a halo over her damp hair, or the quiet defeat in her posture. Or maybe it was because he had heard those same words before. "I have nowhere to go." He'd heard them from his own mother years ago in a one-room apartment with peeling wallpaper on the night their landlord had pounded on the door and told them to get out. They'd spent that night in the back of an old station wagon, the cold seeping into their bones. Back then, no one had stopped for them. Not one person. The light turned green, but his foot stayed on the brake. Against his better judgment, he rolled down the tinted window. "Do you need a ride?" She turned her head slowly, her expression caught between suspicion and disbelief. I can't pay you," she said. "I didn't ask for money," he replied. She hesitated for a heartbeat too long, then stood, dragging her suitcase toward the car. She climbed in, the warmth wrapping around her instantly, though her posture stayed stiff. "Alyssa," she said when he asked her name. She told him about the eviction, about the new owner raising rents so high no one could stay. He knew exactly which building she meant, because he had bought it. He didn't say so, not yet. Instead, he asked about family. "None," she said, her voice flat. The rest of the drive was quiet, the hum of the Bentley's engine filling the space. When they reached the gated driveway of his penthouse, he surprised himself by saying, "Come inside, just for tonight." She blinked at him like he'd offered her the moon. "Why?" "Because someone should have done it for me once." Inside, she wrapped herself in a blanket he handed her and texted a friend from the diner. "Some rich guy picked me up. I'm safe for now." That night, Christopher sat in his office, staring at the file for her building. The plan had been simple: gut it, modernize it, and triple the rent. But now, the numbers looked wrong. They looked like eviction notices. They looked like her. He remembered nights from his childhood when he'd slept in the back seat of a car, washed up in gas station bathrooms, eaten cold beans from a can. He'd built his empire to make sure he'd never feel powerless again, but in doing so, he'd become the very kind of man who once ignored him. Morning came with the smell of coffee and a breakfast spread so large, Alyssa hesitated before touching it. "I need to find work," she said. "Somewhere cheap enough to live until the baby comes." Christopher studied her. "What if you could go back to your apartment?" She frowned. "That's impossible. The new owner is me," he said. Her fork froze. "You?" He nodded. "I was wrong. I don't want to be the reason you're on the street." But she had overheard him the night before, pacing his office, talking to someone on the phone about getting renovations started and locking in new tenants. She had almost left thinking this was some cruel joke. Now, hearing him admit it, she didn't know whether to thank him or curse him. "You bought my home, and now you want to give it back? Why?" "Because once I was you, and no one stopped." That afternoon, he drove her to the building. The remaining tenants glared at him. He gathered them in the courtyard and told them all evictions were canceled, rents restored. A local reporter showed up. "Why the sudden change?" she asked. "Because profit means nothing if you can't sleep at night," he said. The story went viral. Weeks later, at a charity gala, another millionaire pulled him aside. "What you did? Foolish. You could have made millions more." Christopher glanced around at the chandeliers, the glittering dresses. "And what would I buy with it? Another car I don't drive? Another house I don't live in?" The man smirked. "It's not our job to save people." Christopher's voice was quiet but sharp. "Maybe not. But it's our choice, and I've made mine." Alyssa kept her apartment, gave birth to a baby boy she named Chance, and sometimes passed that bus stop, wondering what would have happened if he hadn't stopped. "And now I'll ask you, if it were you, would you have pulled over, or would you have kept driving?"